my colleagues here, reading from here to there, Voranai, Vanijaka. If I get my papers in order, I'll be able to tell you that he's the editor-in-chief of GQ Thailand, which explains what the very fashionable shoes, I guess.
My girlfriend bought me this.
Very nice. He teaches political communication and intercultural communication at Thammasat University and was a political commentator with the Bangkok Post newspaper. Tom Elliott is the host of 3AW's Drive program. He is also a director of the Melbourne-based wealth management firm Beulah Capital, writes a weekly opinion column for the Herald Sun, and appears regularly on the Nine Networks Today and ABC TV's Agony Uncles series, where he's always a double-header with his dad. And Geraldine Brooks, some of you may have seen me and Geraldine speaking yesterday. If you do, then you'll know that she is, we have one thing in common, that we've both been foreign correspondents for quite a long time, but she is much better known now as a novelist. And her first novel, it was your first novel, March, wasn't it?
No, that was my second novel.
Second novel, March.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Actually won the Pulitzer Prize, which her son called the Pulitzer Surprise when somebody came knocking on the door on the day.
Very accurately, actually.
Her novels Caleb's Crossing and People of the Book were both New York Times bestsellers. Year of Wonders and People of the Book are international bestsellers. And she's also, and by the way, that what it doesn't say here is that her latest book, which I've just been reading, is called The Secret Chord, and it's about King David in the Bible. So, the subject today, as I say, is about borders and nations. I might just preface this with a little bit of personal experience. I was the ABC's Europe correspondent in the mid-1980s. In that capacity, I spent quite a lot of time driving very fast from Brussels to Paris, quite often because of terrorist attacks. People forget now that the mid-80s were a period when there were rather a lot of terrorist attacks, and they were generally Middle Eastern based. They were often blamed on the Syrians or the Libyans, so they had a kind of national origin, allegedly, but they were nasty. Quite a lot of people died in them. And I remember, getting to the site of these explosions and still being able to see the damage, the human damage and the physical damage. The reason I'm mentioning this is that because when I started in Brussels in 1984, to drive to Paris, you stopped at the Belgian border, and they would stop your car, look at your passport, and go through the boot, and but by the time I left in 1987, the Schengen Agreement within the European Union was in full swing. There was no longer a border, and you just drove straight through. It saved perhaps a quarter of an hour on the journey, but it was quite a change, and it happened despite terrorism. So it's possible to react to terrorism in ways that don't necessarily mean shutting down borders. I think it's also worth noting that the concept of the nation state and the whole concept of borders is in itself fairly recent in many places, particularly sub-Saharan Africa. It's an imposition of the West generally in the 19th century. But even in Europe, there was no Italy and there was no Germany until the 19th century. I happened to come while doing some family research recently on a diary which my great-great-great-uncle bought on a trip to London in 1883, and it says that basically there's a note in it about passports, and it says an Englishman travelling abroad, and by the way, people from Victoria generally were considered Englishmen for this purpose. An Englishman travelling abroad seldom needs a passport to travel on the continent. Then there follows a series of exceptions where it may be advisable to carry a passport. They include Russia, where the Tsar, Alexander I, had been killed 2 years before by a terrorist, anarchist terrorist assassination. And that sparked off a wave of anarchist terrorist assassinations which lasted over the next 20, 30 or 40 years. And I think in some ways was responsible for bringing in the whole concept of border control and the idea that we have now that everybody has to carry a passport wherever they go from country to country. So that's a little bit of background. Before we started, I just wanted to sketch out a bit of the historical background to indicate that what we think of as country is not necessarily set in stone. And I think from that point of view, I mean, I've mentioned Africa and Europe. I know much less about Southeast Asia, but we might start with you, Voranai, and the question of what country means in your part of the world. There were kingdoms, there have been kingdoms for a long time, but even they have been quite malleable.
Well, I think the concept of kingdoms in Southeast Asia is no different than from anywhere else at some points in history. And I think the concept of borders is very important. It has always been important, and it will always be important. Like, for example, Thailand for the past 30 or 40 years have been squabbling with Cambodia over a 4.5 square kilometers area in which we shell each other, we shoot at each other, we kill each other over it. Now the question is why? Why do we do that? My personal opinion is that it's very human nature. We are tribal people. We have to categorize things, to organize things in order to understand things, so we know which people belong to which group. I grew up in Texas from when I was 12 to when I was 23 years old. And through the 10 years I was in Texas, everybody thought I was Mexican. Except for my English teacher in 7th grade. For the entire year, she thought I was from Taiwan. I kept telling her Thailand. She said, no, Taiwan. I said, no, Thailand. She said, no, Taiwan. I said, okay, I'm from Taiwan. And I don't even look Chinese. But that's Texas. Anyway. But that's how people operate. You see something, you put them in a category. And that category can go from your skin color, your religion, your nationality, so on and so forth. That's how we view and understand the world. And that's why we have countries and borders, and I guess I'll leave that there for now.
Tom, we live on an island. Islands find it generally easier to understand the concept of borders because they don't have to fight over them. What's your idea of nationhood and where it begins and ends?
Look, nationhood's usually a combination of geography. As you say, an island, it could be a mountain range, for example. But it's also, I think, a combination of shared ideas. Now, to take another island, which is closely affiliated with Australia, that of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. In the past 100 years, you've seen the Republic of Ireland separate itself from the rest of Great Britain. And now the official title for Great Britain is the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. So you've got the island of Ireland with the northeast chunk of it, which is still part of Britain. That's Northern Ireland, or Belfast, as most people call it. But having said that, in the last few years, you've seen the re-emergence of nations, if not states, in Scotland, in Wales, and even where my ancestors are from, in Cornwall. There's a sense of revived nationhood. So, as you say, it's fluid. Islands generally, are one nation, generally. But Britain, from which we gain so many of our institutions, I believe is in the process of fracturing. And I remember reading a book written in the 1970s called McCabe PM, and it was about a future dystopian Australia where South Australia and Western Australia seceded, and the last line of the book said, we better start bombing Adelaide. And I remember recoiling that from with horror, and then I thought, more recently, maybe it wouldn't be such a bad thing, but I don't think we can take for well. If you've ever seen an Adelaide Crows,
anyone from the Herald Sun? Hello. That's tomorrow's headline: Bomb Adelaide.
Bomb Adelaide. But it would not surprise me in the future if Australia split apart. I mean, the whole concept of Australasia was coined in the late 1890s when we thought that the South and North Island of New Zealand might become states of Australia. And just the other day, an Australian minister, only semi-tongue-in-cheek, he's a backbencher, suggested that New Zealand become part of Australia. So I think the concept of the nation-state is fluid, very, very fluid. But I think values, to me, are more important than borders. Values will define borders more than just geography will.
Geraldine, your latest book is in fact about the creation of a nation. a long time ago, but it's also about national fault lines between Palestinians or Philistines and Israelis that extend to this very day.
Yeah, I think that I've had a lot of experience in places where people squander a great deal of human life fighting over 5 meters of sand, and that is true in the wars I covered in Eritrea, between Eritrea and Ethiopia, and they're still fighting over 50 meters of sand. I mean, to me, the less borders, the better. And I think historically, when we look at the places when we have been able to not exactly subsume all national difference, but appreciate each other and create inclusive societies, are the moments where you see scientific knowledge and culture really take off, because it is the bringing together of the different gifts and the different experiences of diverse human beings that has allowed us to take the leaps forward. And it's when this hideous divisiveness, this kind of virus that we have that seems to rise up and effloresce over and over again in human history, when we start to demonize the other and put that class of people over there and say they're subhuman, is when we break our societies apart. And I would go back to Convivencia, Spain, when Muslims, Christians and Jews built one of the richest and most vibrant societies we've ever seen, of course only to have that split apart with the rise of extremist Catholicism that said the Muslims had to go and then the Jews had to go. And you could make an argument that Spain has never been as great as it was in the 15th century.
But what do we do now in a situation where, and this is very specific to now, where one nation has effectively imploded and the implosion has thrown out 2 to 3 million of its people, and they have nowhere to go, so they start, eventually, the pressure becomes so great that they start simply ignoring, breaking down national borders. Doesn't there have to be an orderly process involved in all this?
Yeah, and I don't think it's beyond us as an international community to come up with one too. I mean, we seem to be taking a tremendously long time about it because we're in the early stages of that reinfection that I was talking about, where Islam is the other and they're not as good. And, you know, some of the letters to the editor that are being published in our national newspaper, I read that letters page and say, what is this? Internet trolls have taken over our national newspaper. I've been really shocked at the level of Islamophobia that seems to be being encouraged by the Australian newspaper at the moment.
Tom, how much filtering do you have to do on the callers that you get at 3AW on this subject?
I'm always asked that. I would get probably 100 calls per program, of which 40 would get to air, and that's just time limitations. We have a lot of nutters who ring up who, you know, we know who they are, we don't put them to air. But by and large, look, I personally believe in a free exchange of ideas. You know, you say you think the letters page of The Australian has been taken over by internet trolls. I actually disagree. I think there's a genuine fear out there. Now, whether it's well-founded or not is another question, but it is real. It is real.
But that is the question.
That is the question. Now, you know...
But I mean, is that all the letters they're getting? Because it's a consensus on the page.
Well, you've got to say to yourself, okay, what sort of person writes a letter to the newspaper in the first place, rings up a talkback station, goes online and does comments? It's not necessarily representative of the broader country. However, it's as good a cross-section short of polling everybody as you're going to get. And my view is at the moment, people are scared. And when people are scared, circle the wagons, put up the fences. But by the way, on that issue of controlling immigration, you know, Like the Americans can't do it with the Mexican border and haven't been able to do so for decades. And every 5 years they just wave the white flag and say, righto, all of you who got across, you're now citizens, get on with the job. And curiously, it's only Mexico's economic advancement which is now causing people to go back in the other direction. But no, I think there's genuine fear out there. You know, people look at the attacks in Paris and they say, bloody hell, you know, that could happen here. Now, you know, it's no good telling someone that there's only a 5 or a 2% chance. It's like being eaten by a shark. You know, at the moment, 5 people have been eaten by sharks on the northern New South Wales coast. No one's going surfing. Statistically, you're in much more danger when you drive your car to the beach, but while we can contemplate a car accident, we can't contemplate being eaten alive by a shark. And the same goes for a terrorist bomb. So it's not rational, but it's real.
So what's the rational response? What do governments do if they judge that people are reacting irrationally? Isn't it the duty of governments to still continue to act rationally?
Well, it depends what you mean as rational. I mean, rationality or rational behaviour for a government is re-election. That's my view. And so, as a result, if governments feel that the majority of people want to put up the fences, they'll put up the fences. Hence the Stop the Boats campaign by both John Howard and Tony Abbott, which politically worked. You could do what Malcolm Fraser did in the late 1970s and, you know, courageously, by the standards of the day, say that we should allow Vietnamese immigrants, which back then was opposed by the trade union movement, opposed by the Labor Party, you know, from whom a lot of whom believed in the White Australia policy. But he pursued it, and no one would undo that now. But it took quite a lot of political capital to do that. You know, governments want to impose order on things. Even where they can't do it, they want to be seen to be doing it. And hence, you mentioned having an orderly process. I mean, the process is anything but orderly with the flow of refugees out of Syria. But governments want to say that they can impose order. And in Australia, because of our sea borders, probably we can. So as a result, even a more moderate Prime Minister like Malcolm Turnbull is seeking to be fairly hardline on that issue.
Or to look very hardline?
To look or to be is the same thing in my view. It's what you do, not what you say.
Voranai, in Thailand, for a long time, the Thai government has had an interesting and often ambiguous policy towards refugees coming from Myanmar/Burma. You've mentioned that you've got your own border disputes, but there are also, you've had a threat coming from the south, from northern Malaysia, of extremist Muslims. You've now got a dictatorship, a military dictatorship. How do you see the spectrum of Thailand's responses to these issues?
Well, firstly, everything about the Thai government, no matter which one, is ambiguous. Is by definition, that's the Thai government. And, you know, I mean, Thailand, I come from a country where there have been reports that we actually literally push boat loads of Rohingya refugees back out to sea with no food, no water, to die in the middle of the sea. So, you know, I'm not going to be a hypocrite and blaming this issue on anyone else. But however, since I'm on this stage, I'm going to call on what I would say is Western hypocrisy when it comes to treatment of refugees. You know, as a non-Westerner on this stage and as a journalist, I hear time and time again about the virtues of freedom and democracy and equal rights and helping your fellow mankind, so on and so forth. But when push comes to shove, when you have boatloads of refugees coming to your shore, what do? You said correctly, government act rationally, but what is that rationalization? Rationally insofar as being humanity, or rational insofar as catering to votes? It seems to me that in this global atmosphere of fear and anger and Islamophobes, governments tend to react to their own borders, which is to clamp down and close up and push aside these refugees. And I don't mind saying that a part of it has to do with Western religion. I came from
Western religion?
With the conflict between race and religion, between the West and Islam. Again, no matter where I live, I'm a minority. In the States, I'm a Mexican. I live in London for a year, I'm Pakistani. When I go to Paris, I'm Tunisian, and even in Thailand, people look at me and they say I'm half white because I don't look very Thai either. But the point is, and I have this discussion in many forums with Anglo-Saxons, whether they are Americans, Europeans, or Australians, the point comes down to this. If you open up your border to take these refugees, and these people come in, and the truth of the matter is, first of all, they are very dark-skinned. Second of all, they smell of spice. Third of all, they worship a god and a religion where a lot of people in the West think is a Satan, is the devil. And when you have these people coming in, and that's the attitude, I'm not saying that that's the attitude of everybody. And hopefully not everybody, hopefully not even the majority, but that's a loud and vocal attitude.
But if you single out Western religion, aren't you rather letting Buddhist Thailand and Buddhist Myanmar off the hook? Because they have both been equally...
Buddhist Myanmar has been killing Muslims.
Sorry?
Buddhist Myanmar has been killing Muslims.
Yes.
Currently, it's an atrocities. Religions are religions.
And as you said, Thailand, and you had to phrase this very carefully, I noticed. There have been reports that Thailand...
I still have a country to go back to, otherwise you end up with another brown man here in Australia.
An Australian journalist and his colleague had a very difficult time with a case of so-called criminal libel in your country for talking about exactly that. But that doesn't speak... I mean, basically, we're talking about all religions, aren't we?
We are talking about all religions. Religions, as I said earlier this morning session, religions and ideologies to me are simply tools to unite and guide a people to accomplish certain goals. Sometimes they are wonderful goals, sometimes they are atrocities. And our religions have been guilty of atrocities and also of making wonderful things. Now, but the specific in the discussion that we've been having here is, of course, the problem with the war in the Middle East and the Syrian refugees, which is affecting America, Europe, and I'm assuming Australia also.
But let's just, I mean, not to be too hard on the West. The West has a very long track record of letting people in. I mean, wander around the streets of Melbourne, as you probably did. I mean, you will see many tongues spoken. I sat there in a cafe before, a couple chatting loudly in Italian at each other, which is quite common here in Melbourne. A big chunk of Melbourne is Asian. Where I live, you know, we're getting more and more African immigrants. I mean, this idea that we just put up the walls and don't allow people in, I would say is not true. London is a truly global city. New York, I mean, you know, Western countries, you can argue, should we take more? You know, why do we want it to be orderly? It's not orderly. But it's not like we don't allow people in and don't allow them the chance to worship how they want or believe in what they want. I mean, we do.
I agree completely. And again, I grew up in the West and I see multiculturalism in the West that I don't see in the East. And I can guarantee you Thai people are very racist. You know, so I have no problem with that. However, the issue here is that today, with the current problem, with the wars in the Middle East, with Islamophobia, that's today's problem. Which way is the West going? You're going to open up, you're going to receive, you're going to try to solve the problem, or you're going to close down, you're going to clamp up, and you look at them and point at them and tell them and say that they are evil, the devil. Or are you going to say that there's a difference between a man strapping himself with bomb, blowing up a market? Is there any difference between that man and another man sitting in a room controlling a drone strike and blew up a village? Now, to me, an outsider, I'm neither Islam, I'm neither Christian, I'm neither Middle Easterner, I'm neither the West. To me, I look at it and I see the same thing. People killing each other, just different methods. People killing each other to try to accomplish a political goal.
But there's still a very large practical problem, and a lot of it is happening in the Balkans, an area which Geraldine and I know quite well. And it takes the form of hundreds of thousands of people, poor, hungry, in great distress, just literally voting with their feet, marching northwards across borders, when necessary, pulling borders down. How practically are we going to deal with this?
Well, I think we have to, you know, many, if not a majority of those Syrians did not want to leave their country. And we have to take ownership of our share of the responsibility for the chaos that has driven them out. Now, I'm not going to pretend I have any political solution for Syria, but boy, better brains than mine better start working on it. And, last year would have been too late. Meanwhile, there are cold, hungry, vulnerable people, and we have to take them in. And what you were saying, that, look around at the wonderful diversity of this country, is there anybody here that thinks that we're worse off for having taken refugees in the past? I remember when I was coming up, it was the Vietnamese were, they don't assimilate, they live in enclaves and they're joining criminal gangs, and isn't it terrible? And now they're my radiologist and my orthodontist. So, give people a minute. It may be the first people who set foot traumatized off the boat are not going to entirely embrace Australian values, but what we have here is extremely attractive, and it has been extremely attractive to people who have come, that their children want to be part of this. I don't think it's an insurmountable problem at all.
The issue is still numbers, isn't it? I mean, we're looking at 2-3 million people. We don't know exactly how many, but I mean, there's 2.2 million displaced into Turkey already, and they are not necessarily going to want to stay there or be welcome there. And Australia, even though it's a large country,
it's a fragile and
it's a fragile environment. Yes. It has problems with water and all the rest of it. And even if we decided that our share was 500,000 people, morally, we probably couldn't take 500,000 people, could we?
I don't know that, I don't want to talk about the mathematics of it, because it's pretty corrupt when people are drowning to talk about the mathematics of it. I know that we could do more. I think we could do it very well. And, I think ultimately it's enriching to us to act in that way, not to mention our responsibilities under the treaties that we've signed. I think that we're one of the most successful, not perfect, but one of the most successful multicultural societies that there is. And I think we can be a model to the world in this.
But you say it's morally corrupt to talk about the mathematics of it. See, I just don't buy that. For example, when most of the refugees left Vietnam, very few went all the way in a boat, from South Vietnam all the way to Australia. Most stopped off in places like Hong Kong and whatever, and they had big resettlement programs, and all the countries involved in the Vietnam War, plus some others like Britain, basically agreed the numbers, the proportions. So it was done in as organised a manner as such a thing could be done. They
tended to go to Hong Kong because it was the first place they could get
exactly.
And then they were kept in really very horrible refugee camps.
But there was a deal done on the numbers. And
this is this idea that we should only take people from refugee camps when refugee camps are simply not available to a lot of people, and even when people are in refugee camps, Australian consular officials seldom, if ever, go there.
Sure, but
they can't get into the queue. That's not the idea of the queue.
My point is more on the numbers, is to say that there is a limit with any nation as to how many people you can take. And to sit there and to say, oh, well, I don't know what the number is, therefore I won't even discuss it. There is one. There is one. And a politician, curiously, will be able to tell you what that limit is, because they know how far you can push things. And all I'm saying is it is not immoral to discuss the numbers. It is fair enough for Australia to say, righto, we are this big, 24 million people. We probably don't want our population to go beyond X, therefore we can have this many immigrants. And that defines a number. And then you decide how many are refugees and whatever. It is not immoral to do that. Every refugee you take, you are doing some good, even though you are not solving the problems of the world.
Let me put it to you that this city would not exist in the way that it did if you applied the arguments that you are applying back in 1851 when the gold rush hit.
Of course not.
This place, which was then called Port Phillip District, I think, not Victoria, went from 80,000 people to 400,000 people in a couple of years.
Okay, but on that logic, you would apply what happened in the mid-19th century.
A politician would have said, numbers.
Yeah,
we've got to keep it down to 20,000.
No, we learn from history. I mean, you would never... Melbourne evolved, and it evolved very rapidly because of the discovery of gold. Now, that is not the way to do a city. It just so happened that way. And there's a ton of things that happened. I mean, back then, the concept of the wild that you could take inexorably from from the wild landmass and it would never run out. Now we're saying that the Amazon rainforest might have a finite life. We don't believe that anymore. What people believe changes. My view is that Australia cannot solve the problems of the world. We can do our bit, and our bit can be considerable, but there is a limit to it. And once we acknowledge that limit, we can say, right, it's like donating money. I mean, you can't donate 100 cents in the dollar that you make. You can donate some.
Yeah, but let's get on with doing the considerable bit.
Well, they just said they'll take 12,000 Syrians in a week in politics. Bang, they said we'll take 12,000 extra refugees, just like that. That's our bit. I mean, and it was done fairly quickly.
If I may,
Please.
and I'm Australian here. If I may offer another perspective. Now, personally, I believe a government's first and foremost priority is to the citizens of its country,
True.
not anyone else. The citizens that pay tax, who has a nationalship card, that's the first and foremost priority. Personally, I don't have a problem with Russia and Putin saying we don't want any refugees. It's your thing. When Germany said, bring us the refugees...
Do you really think that the people of Russia have much of a democratic say in all of that?
Oh, of course not. But like it or not, Putin is the president. And he speaks for the country.
But you just seem to have gone from a position of it's
That's
down
just-
to the taxpayers to the position of it's down to the oligarch president.
Okay, let's say Hungary then.
Okay.
Hungary, kick out the refugees. Okay, that's fine. That's your policy. Germany, bring in the refugees. High five. You're wonderful. You're great. The point here is that compassion and kindness, what is it? Is it a duty or is it a privilege? A duty or a privilege? Because if you think it's a duty, then everybody should take in refugees, no question asked. If it's a privilege, then it's a choice. You can choose to or you can choose not to. Now, me, the first time I've been to Melbourne, I've been here for 2 days. I walk up and down the street. It's a beautiful city. It's a clean city. I see people of different race, different ethnicity, different cultures all around. The weather is wonderful. Compared to Bangkok, the weather here is like heaven.
You better stay here for a few more days and change your mind.
And I see people walking around. And yesterday I joined the climate change protesting. And I look around, it's like, my God, you are protesting about the climate. Is this what rich people do? Protesting for the climate? I'm from a country where, we have a shitload, I'm from Texas. We have a shitload of problems before we can get to protesting about the climate. And I was talking to a protester, and I was like, look, you guys, this is nothing. A protest, no bombs, no snipers, nobody killing each other. This is nothing. And I look around, I've been here for 2 days, and I think to myself, what privileged, lucky you guys are. You are so lucky to get to live in this wonderful place, wonderful city. And yet, most people in this world do not have this privilege. I'm from Bangkok. I don't mind saying I do well, look at me. But I look out the window of my office, I look down, I see a huge slum. I walk the street, I know I'm still in a developing world country. Here, oh my God. So basically I'm saying it might not be the duty of Australia to help others. You might not have to. But wouldn't it be great to share some of these things? Wouldn't it be great to sacrifice a little so that others, the refugees, the downtrodden, to breathe clean air, have clean food, have clothes, have shelter? Wouldn't it be wonderful? It comes down to human compassion. That's all it is.
Geraldine, the idea of rights, responsibilities made me think about and I'm not certainly the first person to point this out, the fact that the people who have taken the fewest refugees, if any at all, tend to be the Saudis, the Gulf states.
Don't get me started on the
Well, I won't
Saudis.
get you started, actually, because the very same people who have exported Wahhabism over the last 20 or 30 years and have directly or indirectly encouraged IS and the associated groups which are at the heart of all this are the ones who are taking fewest refugees. A, what do you think about that? And B, does that act as any kind of excuse for first world countries which are at least trying to take some?
If you start judging yourself by Saudi Arabia, that is, to quote Paul Keating, a very, very low bar. No, I mean, it's unconscionable that they are not taking refugees. That place is so exclusionary that if you come in there as somebody who's been hired to work and you bring your family Bible, it will be torn up in front of you. Bring in a blow-up Santa Claus because it's Christmas for your kids and it will be ripped up. Don't dare wear a cross around your neck, and if you are somebody who wears a Star of David, you won't get a visa anyway. There's no religious service that is not Islamic allowed in that country, and Shiites are persecuted and not allowed to use the full language of prayer that pertains to Shiism. So let's not, talk about Saudis as the model for anything. I think that I like to think about, I love your description of how lucky this country is and how wonderful it is. This country started in agony of the most wretched and despised people on earth being dumped out here. And out of that, we built this beautiful place. And I think in looking at who we should take, we should look at who we were and what we made out of that. And I think it is, the despised poor and the wretched of the earth who are the people who will be the grateful citizens and the best citizens that you can possibly imagine having.
Tom? I don't see Australia, curiously, as lucky. In fact, when Donald Horne said we were the lucky country, as you know, he meant it slightly ironically or sarcastically. I mean, countries to a certain extent, pardon me, make their own luck. Singapore's an interesting example, doesn't have much in the way of natural resources. Apart from
we're going to get on to benevolent dictatorship.
No. But I'm just saying that it has made something. People say, oh, well, if you've got natural resources, you're very lucky. Well, look at Africa. Africa's chock-a-block full of natural resources, and yet it has virtually no stable governments. It has wars all over the place. It has a level of terrorism and extremism that isn't actually talked about very much. And I've never really understood why we focus on one area, but Nigeria, which is almost as bad as Syria, just seems to and I've spent a lot of time in Africa. It's one of my favourite parts of the world. I want to take my daughter there next year to see some of the animals, because from what I can tell, they're all going to be poached out of existence in the near future. But, I'll still get back to this idea. We are having the debate. It's not whether or not to take people. It's not whether we're compassionate or not compassionate. It's the level of that compassion. And, whether it's 12,000 refugees or 20,000 or 50,000, the number is being talked about. People are coming in. Refugees are coming into this country every single day, via every single means, via plane, from refugee camps, still the occasional ones via boats. It is happening. So I suppose I get a bit sick of Australia being characterised as this sort of terrible place which isn't doing anything. It is. And I just look at it from, I guess, a political perspective to say that, the communities have to be taken along. Things have to be explained. And just think about with what's happening in Syria. It was only a few weeks ago that tragic image of that little boy being washed up dead on a Turkish beach turned everybody's hearts and made people less hard-hearted collectively. And sure enough, bang, within a week, 12,000 refugees. A few weeks later, 130-odd people killed in Paris. Everything goes back in the other direction. So there's no real planning going on here. In my view, there's just reacting to events. From the compassionate response to the death of one little boy to the very angry response of, 130 Parisians dead. I don't know what's going to come next. I guess what I don't see is someone arguing the rational case that tries to get away from the day-to-day headlines, and that's what we're not seeing at the moment.
And that's what political leadership is for.
But it's very hard to compete with those headlines. When millions of people are dying and yet one death makes a change. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, well, that's what, when I was a correspondent, and I know probably true for Mark, that was our business, was to take the one story, because you have to make people understand the particular cases, because that's how we work as human beings. It's much easier to relate to the Kurdish family that's on the run from Saddam's bombs and who takes their Labrador retriever, even though they're going to be living in a car for the next 6 weeks with no food and no toilet. But that father wanted the children to have this one thing that they loved that would be the stability in their life. So I tell that story, and suddenly everybody can relate to that. And that's what reporters are for, and politicians too. They need to, humanize the story. And what we've had here over the last decade has been the opposite. We've had a complete shutting down of reporting from the detention centres, where Australians have no idea who those children are who are locked up there. And that is because political leadership didn't want to tell those stories because they knew that would touch our heart.
Voranai, I was in Cambodia 20-something years ago during the UN transition period, and I travelled around quite a bit up on the northwest border near the Thai border, and I saw trucks going through loaded with timber and other trucks loaded with jade, I was told. And I was told that this was the borders essentially didn't exist, and that this was because a lot of this was. I'm not sure how much you're allowed to say about this, but I was told that a lot of this was basically being run by Thai generals. A lot of this trade was owned by Thai generals and corrupt people on the Cambodian side and corrupt people on the Chinese side. I mean, you live in a region where there are parts of it where there simply are no borders.
Well, again, I would say there are borders, but I agree with you. In where I come from, countries are run by politicians / gangsters / generals, so on and so forth, and everything is commercialized. And the trading you're talking about between borders, I mean, it had been done for centuries between the villages on each side, and also the drug smuggling, the timber smuggling, so on and so forth. It goes up and up and up and up to the higher level. You can trace that all the way up to Bangkok. So it's basically just commercialization of the border.
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it just brings us back to where
but,
we
sorry,
were early on about.
I just want to agree with Tom on his shock on reacting to headlines. I agree completely. That's what we do, and that's a dangerous thing, because I guarantee you, when the Paris attack happened, everybody in Thailand was talking about the Paris attack. That's the number one issue. But then 2 days later, we were all talking about what happened on The Face Thailand. It's a reality TV show about models. So we are reacting to issues, to things that happen, which means we are simply, at the end of the strings, reacting to whoever pulling the strings wants us to react to. Now, it goes back to my original points about we have been having refugees for thousands of years and wars for thousands of years. And this will go on for hundreds and thousands of years. That's never going to change. We should ask the question, why are we having these wars? Why are we having these refugees? Why are things happening in the Middle East and in Syria? Now, my personal theory on that is, it has to happen. It must happen. It's geopolitics. It's the hot spot in the geography map. This region, the Middle East, it controls the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz, which is vital to international trade. The world system is based on international trade. It has an access to the Mediterranean, it's the underbelly of Europe, it's the gateway to Central Asia and East Asia. There's a reason why the Americans took over Iraq and Afghanistan in order to sandwich Iran, in order to check Pakistan and India and China. There are reasons for all of these things, and it's all geopolitics. And it has been played ever since Agamemnon decided to sail the Greeks and Brad Pitt to Troy and take over that country.
Which fortunately was filmed for our benefit. So
apparently it was over in 2 weeks. But that was always the point. It's always geopolitics, even though the reason given then was about a woman named Helen and about Greek manhood and pride. And the same thing happening now. We are talking about religions, we talk about this and that. That's not the point. It's about power and wealth. And that's how the world works. And that's why there will always be conflicts and wars and refugees and so on and so forth. And you know what? The Middle East, well, shit. That's the main stage since 2,000 or 3,000 years ago, where all the conflicts happen, because that is the crossroad. And that's just tough luck. And with Islam, tough luck. Because basically, you lost. You lost. It's a dog-eat-dog world. Winners and losers. You lost, so you are victimized, so you become refugees.
But see, on and I know we've got questions in a moment, but I mean, And you said a similar thing in our earlier sessions today. I mean, if that's the case, and there's plenty of theories out there that say that, war is the natural state for humankind, not peace, but war. If you adopt that position, then frankly, a country like Australia, put up the fences, big sea borders, staying out of it all makes a lot of sense.
You
a
jump
lot
to
of
that
sense.
conclusion.
I'm just going to mention to people that there are ushers at the end of each back aisle, if you see what I mean. And if you want to ask a question, I'm afraid you're going to have to get up and go to the ushers and line up with them. So just carry on, you two. Or Geraldine, if you want to jump in. And we'll take a question as soon as somebody's ready to answer it, to ask it.
Well, Geraldine, I mean, you reported, it was with the ABC for foreign correspondent.
Wall Street Journal.
Wall Street Journal. I mean, you've seen so many wars. Have you ever sort of seen any that made any more sense than others?
No.
Do you feel that we've learnt anything?
Yeah, I've learned something. All right, so I did think that, I'm going to admit that I did think taking out Saddam Hussein was a good idea, because I had been in the previous Gulf War and with the Kurds when they rose up against Saddam. I was with them when they freed their people from the security prisons and saw the torture cells and the bits of human ear cartilage nailed to the wall and things of that nature. And then I saw that we allowed Saddam to come and crush those uprisings in Kurdistan and also in the Shiite regions in the south, and then left people under his boot, and the sanctions were only hurting ordinary people and causing children to suffer while Saddam and his cronies were enriched by them. So yeah, I thought that would be a good idea to go to war, and that was completely wrong. You can't actually... War is a very blunt instrument. It doesn't work. It was a terrible idea, as we now see. So the only thing I've learned about war is that it just doesn't work.
I thought it was quite a good thing when Hun Sen invaded Cambodia and got rid of Pol Pot. But 30-something years later, with Hun Sen still there, and what is essentially a gangster / Marxist-Leninist dictatorship still in place, pretending to be a democracy, it's not exactly clear that was even that.
I mean, the Australian government was instrumental in putting Robert Mugabe in power, over what was then Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, and sure enough, he's still in power.
So, questions. First question from over there.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a great discussion. I'm from Canada, probably the most similar culture to yours, and we're undergoing the same question about refugees. On a spiritual level, I absolutely believe in the interconnectedness of human beings, and it's a beautiful thing. Borders have been developed as a human tool, and we develop tools in order to accomplish certain tasks. So I'm wondering, the question I'd like answered is, do you believe that borders as a tool are more or less beneficial? If I was a starving Mexican trying to get into America, I would see the border as a very awful tool and wish I was on the other side of it. However, I'm very glad that there is a border when it's respected that means that I don't have to live under Mr. Putin. So is a border a more beneficial or a less beneficial tool for civilizations to use to keep us separated from each other?
Great question. Who wants to answer it?
Well, I think good fences make good neighbours, I really do. The Romans built Hadrian's Wall because they couldn't quite deal with the unruly Scots to the north of England, and bits of it are still standing. Some people in England think it should be re-erected, but anyway. People like to see order imposed, and a border is a form of order, and I didn't mean that to rhyme on purpose, it just does. They don't always work, they are penetrated, they're amorphous. I remember seeing the Berlin Wall in the 1980s, like that was a horrible border, but it was a border nonetheless. Overall, I think they're a good thing.
I quite like the line in response to Donald Trump saying there should be a 12-foot fence between the United States and Mexico to keep out the Mexican immigrants, and several comedians have made this joke. It's one of the reasons I know it, because there's a fight about who actually came up with it first, but the response is, who's going to build it? And I think the Berlin Wall was unequivocally appalling, and I filmed along it wasn't just the Berlin Wall, by the way, I filmed along the walls that kept the Czechs, the Hungarians, the East Germans out of West Germany, and so on. And I can think of very few things in my life more quietly sinister than those borders. Borders can be hideous.
Yeah, but if you were living in West Berlin, in the middle of East Germany, that border represented a bit of freedom that the people around you did not have. I mean, if it wasn't defended...
They had the freedom. They had the freedom before 1961 when the wall went up. The West Germans weren't being protected from the East Germans. The East Germans were being protected from the freedom of the West. That was what was so obscene about the Berlin Wall. I'm supposed to be the host here, and now I'm jumping in.
I think it would be, when you look at our fragile planet, and, I was at the climate march as well, and I do feel that, if we don't get climate change under control, all of these issues will be moot, because we will have a refugee crisis of the like we've never seen before. When people's lands become uninhabitable, and they can't find food. And the people who are actually taking this seriously are the militaries of Britain and the United States, who are gaming climate wars now, which will, I think, make these wars of religion a bit of a doddle, really, on the scale that we might have to deal with mass migration away from starvation.
Sorry, Jody. Question from here.
Yes, thank you. I thought it was ironic that they've torn down the wall but prevented the East Germans getting to the West, and now they're building a wall to stop other people getting into the West. That's just a point. But the question is, we talked about numbers earlier. John Howard stopped the boats, or attempted to stop the boats, and prevent maybe 20, 30,000 people arriving in Australia. At the same time, he increased immigration to significantly larger levels than had been the case since the Second World War. So we had almost 300,000 people coming to the country. So there's a very interesting discrepancy in the argument about numbers as to what is actual and what is desirable, and it seems the desirabilities are in relation to the otherness or the distance of the people concerned. Just want to comment on that.
Oh, look, I think it's more, it's a very good example, but it's a political example. Australians don't care about people who arrive via aeroplanes. They just don't. They don't care that a lot of them overstay their visas. For some reason, they do care about boat arrivals because it doesn't look orderly. That's all it is. And John Howard knew that. He was quite pro-immigration because he was in favour of a bigger Australia. He just wanted it to be in a way that was acceptable to the broad population. So that's what they did. They increased immigration. Now, and they actually increased the intake of refugees. They just didn't do it via boat. Morally, what's superior? What would you rather have? More refugees but not via boat, or fewer refugees with some via boat? I don't know. That's a judgment. But that was the judgment he made, and frankly, for him, it worked.
My previous question was actually related to that in some aspects, because I was going to point out that immigration does theoretically always increase economic capacity of a nation, and if a politician is aiming to increase the economic capacity of a nation, you would want to increase immigration. But you did point out that we have been increasing immigration, just not from the boat people, which is apparently a very dirty word in political discourse in Australia. So yeah, I guess wouldn't you say that part of the imperative of a journalist is to also have sort of a moral hand in creating the notion, the things that will be kind of filtered down through society and influence people, because you do have enormous influence as journalists. Would you say that then maybe you have an imperative to stop calling them boat people and address them as asylum seekers, which is not also a dirty word? It is the state of their political status as a person seeking asylum in another country under a treaty that we signed too. Would you say that there is a moral imperative to influence public discourse in that direction?
Well, I've worked for the ABC, and the policy is to use the phrase asylum seekers. I think maybe if we had, if Tom called people who arrive here illegally, it's not just visa overstayers who arrive on planes. There are people who arrive on planes, quite a large number of them, and ask for asylum on arrival.
No, that's my point.
But we never talk about plane people.
No, that's what I'm saying.
So why do we never talk about plane people?
Well,
why do your callers never talk about plane people?
I can't. I'm not responsible for what people say. You asked, is there a moral imperative for a journalist? I mean, I have my points of view. Right, the way I look at things, they may be a bit different at the ABC. When I go on air, I say, this is what I think. What do you think? And it's a forum. It's not, I don't try and tell people what to think. I just put my point of view forward. Yes, you have some influence because you're setting the direction of the debate, but I get as many people who say I'm a dickhead as who agree with me. So, when you say, is there a moral imperative? Well, you could start asking a series of questions. You might struggle to find two people in the room that would agree on things. The whole idea of what is moral and whatnot is a very challenged question of itself. Language, is boat people bad and refugee okay and asylum seeker good? I got told off the other day because I referred to someone as an Aborigine, and I was told that's wrong. An Aboriginal person is better. Now, to me, they're the same, but apparently that's the way language has gone. So, I find this very confusing.
Do ties worry? You talked about them turning, allegedly,
yes,
allegedly turning back people in Rohingya refugees in boats. How do ties make a distinction between the people who have been coming across the border, the land border, and people who have been coming in by sea? Do they make those kinds of distinctions?
It's not a big issue that we discuss within society. We don't debate on it on the internet forum. It's not that big of a concern to us right now because at least at the moment, we see the benefit of these refugees and immigrants coming in because we're pragmatic people. At the end of the day, the people who serve our food in restaurants, who cleans our house right now are the Burmese refugees. We can't live without them. We need them. I have cousins, families who, if their Burmese maid leave for 2 days, they just don't know what to do. They are lost. They had a Burmese national election last week or something, and Burmese maids left the country to go vote, and we were like, what's happening? Not only are they leaving us to vote, they are voting in Burma while we in Thailand are living under dictatorship. What is happening to this world? Things changed just like that.
We're over time. I'm going to take one more last question.
One last question. The theme of this forum is the concept of a country obsolete? As a preface to my actual question, when I speak as an Australian, I speak of more than my borders. When I speak as an American, as I still sometimes do, I speak of more than the physical country that you can see on the map. It's like the mind is more than the brain. Is there a place for a concept of Australia, a concept of any other country, or is the world evolving beyond the loyalties and the dictates that have created countries in the past?
Great. Geraldine, let's start with Geraldine because she is an Australian American by birth and by marriage and by her geographical
running
movement.
Backwards and forwards,
yeah.
Yes. As much as I've been critical of the barbed wire border, I do feel very Australian in my gut. And I think that there is something wonderful about a sense of place and belonging. The way the light hits the rock makes me happy when I'm here, the way the air smells, the way the piss-taking humour. It defines something for me that is very much who I am and who I'll always be. When I get off the plane in Jordan, I love the mingled scent of dust and cardamom in the coffee that tells me I'm back in Jordan. I like the diversity, the wonderful colour and texture of being a human being on this planet. So if there's some way that we can hold on to these things that we love about our own place and our home place, and I'm sure the Syrians love about their home place even as they have to flee it. And at the same time open our hearts to accept that what unites us as human beings is always going to be more than what divides us. Then we talk about humanity.
Are you a Thai or a Texan, Voranai?
I've written in the Griffith Review journal last year that I'm a Thai who grew up in Texas, so I have Thai humility, but I also have Texan arrogance, all flowing in the same body. So I'm a walking contradiction of somewhat.
Literally all hat and no cattle.
Yeah, definitely.
Tom?
Oh, look, I'll answer the question in the negative. I used to live next door to a South African couple who left when the apartheid era was still going, and both of them were in IT and very good jobs, and then they just disappeared, and we got an email from them, and their practice was to own nothing, to come to a country, to live in it, to work in it, and then they would leave, and they'd literally walk out with their laptops, their mobiles, their credit cards, the clothes they had on, and go and live somewhere else. And at first I admired them. They were stateless people who could live pretty much anywhere. But after a while I felt sorry for them because they almost had no roots. They had each other and they shifted countries every 3 or 4 years. And I ultimately felt sorry for them.
Thank you all very much. I'm going to end where I should have begun but forgot, just with a reminder that we are meeting today on the traditional land of the Kulin Nation. Since we've been talking about nationhood, it's always useful to remember that we're on land that was once owned by somebody else. So I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and elders from other communities who may have been here today. And that's all from us for this session. Thank you so much for coming. Have a great afternoon.